Hello and welcome to Straight to Coding. Today we are going to talk about JSON Web Tokens, okay, or JWT for short. JSON Web Tokens are open source industry standard method for representing claims or data securely between two parties or services, okay? And today we are going to talk about how to generate it, how to validate it, and how to read it, okay? Now I've got here a simple application, starting with a simple class that I'm going to use to generate the JWT token. Okay, so I've obviously got three methods: generation method, the validation method, and the reading data method. Okay, so let's start with how I define the generation method. Okay, the generate token method. As I said earlier, is a way of JWT is a way of securing data. Okay, so and the data is normally stored in a subject. But let's start from top to bottom. Okay. In order to generate a token, we need to have a security key. Okay. So I've got here some random characters for generating the key. Okay. So the security key is generated by converting the key into bytes and then creating a symmetric security key out of it. And then we create a description, a token description here, and then once we create a token description, we generate the token. We generate a JWT security token, and then we write it as a string. We convert that into a string. Okay, now let's have a look at the token description. The token description contains subject, expiration date, issuer, audience, and then the signing credentials. The signing credentials is basically this your security key and the algorithm to use. In this case, I'm using SHA-256. So for the credentials, the signing credentials, I'm using SHA-256. Okay, and then I just have here some random audience and random issuer. You pass those information here, and then you set the expiration date. In this case, I'm just selling it for 1 minute. Okay, now as I said, the data that is important to us is here in the form of claims. So here I'm just passing some user data here, so sample user data, and I'm generating the user ID, adding the user ID, the name, and the username to the claims, and then creating a token out of it, and then writing the token as a string back. So that's the generate token method. Now looking at the validate token method here is also very simple. Okay, so we are going to pass the token, the string that we created here. We're going to pass it back, and then we are going to validate that string token. Okay, now these are the parameters that I've set here. Okay, so I've made sure that the issuer is added here as a valid issuer and a valid audience. I'm going to use it. I'm going to validate these two. So that's what I've said here: validate the issuer and validate the audience to true. And I'm going to validate the expiration as well. And I'm going to by validating the expiration, we need to have the required expiration time set to true. We required it, and we also required the token. Okay, and for any time differences, we need to set a clock skew. In this case, I'm setting it back to zero. The minimum, set it as low as possible. So in this case, I'm setting it to zero, and then pass your security key back again because we're going to use it. Okay, now if everything is valid, you get back your security token, the one that we created here. And once you get it back, just do one or two checks on it. Make sure it's an actual JWT token. Make sure you validate the header, the algorithm that we use. Remember, we use the SHA-256 here. Make sure it's still SHA-256 in case it's been tampered with. Okay, and if there's any issue, just throw an exception. Okay, so that's the validate token method. The reading is very simple. Just pass the token to the JWT and just read it. What you can do is you can call the validate first and then read it, but you can, in this case, just an example, so you can just um, read it straight away. Okay, and so that's the service for dealing with JWT. I've got here a typical controller, just read write controller. So the first one we're going to do is we're going to use it to generate the token. We will pass the token back to validation endpoint, and then the reading endpoint will also read it. So let's run it, and then we will call all these endpoints. Okay, don't forget here, let me put a breakpoint here. Don't forget that this is just a random user data, and I'm going to generate the token out of it. Okay, and then we will get a token back as a JSON result. Once we get a token back, we will pass it back to the validation. So let's have a look here. What we need to do here is generate the token. So we call this token endpoint, generate token endpoint. We just sample data here. We're going to generate it. Okay. So it's generated. This is your JWT token. Okay. Now we are going to call the validation endpoint to validate it. Okay, we are still within 1 minute, so I'm going to validate it, and if everything is successful, we will get 200 back. Remember the 200 that we set here. We're going to get 200 back if it's valid, so we can get 200 back here. If it's not valid, if there's any issue, we're going to throw an exception, which is 400. Then let's call this endpoint and do the reading. We're going to read the token. Okay, so call this endpoint with the same data, with the same token. Okay, and read it. There, we get 200 back. Now let's inspect the data back and see what we get here. See, all the issuer is still here. Okay, and if you look at the claims, this is a claims. Okay, the actual data that we set. Okay, we have the user type, we have our data back here, we have the type here, which is name. We got the full bar back here, and then we have the user name that we set randomly is still here as part of the claims, and we get other extra information, which is the expiration and expiration here. We have all this information back, the issuer and all that information back. Okay, so the data we set here is still valid. Okay, it's still there. Now let's go and call the valid endpoint. I think it's been 1 minute, so let's call this validation endpoint and see if we are going to get 400 back or 200 back. If it's been 1 minute, then I'm expecting this to fail. Okay, so I click this execute button again, and let's go and verify. There you go. So we're getting 400. It has expired, so that's why we're getting 400 back. It's been more than a minute. Okay, so this is very simple JWT service. Okay, have a look at it and try to understand the data, how JWT works, and don't forget to subscribe. Okay, thank you.